So we're going to start with this picture right here, because Christmas for me, maybe for you, is all about sweets and stuff like that. And there's nothing wrong with that, except that I became a type 2 diabetic because of this. But that's another different thing. But there's what I like about this picture is that this kind of holiday candy you don't see except at Christmas, pretty much. But did you know there's a single term for this kind of candy? There's a single term that encompasses all that candy you see in the picture. Junk? Junk? You're missing the spirit of it. Here's that term. The children were nestled all snug in their beds while visions of sugar plums danced in their head. You ever wondered what a sugar plum is? Everything in that picture. You mean it's not a fruit plum? No. In fact, in the early 1800s, the word plum, in British English, the word plum meant good. So like we still use it slightly today. Like if you get a really nice job, someone would say, oh, you've got a plum job, right? Think that kind of plum. So when you think, in fact, there was if you spoke sweet words, they would say that you have sugar plums in your mouth because you speak sweet words, If you were going to bribe somebody, you would shove sugar plums into their mouth, which meant that you were giving them good things and you were bribing them. So plums actually meant something different. So when they actually came up with these little hand-sized confections, we're not talking cakes, we're not talking pies or any other kinds of sweets. We're talking about little things that are sweet you can put in your mouth. You shape them and they've got to be about the size of a plum, but they were pure sugar. They were pure sugar. In fact, the only thing that really fits that category today of how they did it back then is Jordan almonds. You have almonds and you got this layered sugar around it. Well, think that, but instead of almonds in the middle, you've got sugar. So that whole picture we have right there, those are all sugar plums. Those are all sugar plums. And it made me think, during Christmas time, Christmas is kind of dreamy. Because here, when Cummin wrote his thing here, he says that, they fell asleep, and as they're sleeping, they're dreaming of sugar plums. They're thinking of a picture like this. So I started thinking, because Jim's kind of odd, about how dreamy Christmas is. Let me give you another example, okay? Let's go to this picture right here. Now that's what I call sugar plums today, okay? Forget that other hard candy. Junk. Just junk. I had to find the largest close-up picture of chocolate possible. Because later this morning out on the table there will be no chocolates at all. You all just kind of quieted down. That was just really cool. Nothing. None for you. You've been naughty. Okay, try this picture. This is another picture about dreaminess. Okay, you got this nice winter landscape. You got the warm cabin with the warm firelight inside and all that kind of stuff. And all of a sudden I start thinking of, I'm dreaming of a white Christmas. I'm dreaming. We're dreaming again. Christmas dreaming. Hey, did you know, I had to look this up. The song White Christmas was written in 1940 and by Irving Berlin, who is a Jew who emigrated from Europe. So he wrote this song, and it didn't actually find a public performance until Bing Crosby did in 1941 on his radio show. And that first performance was done 2 weeks after Pearl Harbor. So it became kind of a home and hearth song for the soldiers who went overseas for the entirety of World War II. I want this Christmas at home rather than the Christmas in the foxhole eating my rations and all that kind of stuff. So it really became that, and it pretty much set the tone for a whole raft of Christmas songs since then that all paint the picture of family and hearth and home and return and all that kind of thinking. That's what this song is. And then I was surprised to find out. So you get Jim's trivia when he does these research. Then I found out that you know what the #1 most popular selling single in the world has been? This song. And 50 million copies have been sold of Bing Crosby singing this song. The next runner-up to most popular single is Elton John's Candle in the Wind. How about that? So this is still #1. Still #1. Still #1. So this song right here. Okay, we're back to dreamy. So here, when you look at even the secular ideas about Christmas, they're always kind of dreamy. And I wondered, is that a wrong posture for us to take? And then it dawned on me, well, no. What are you talking about? Well, let's find out. This is what I'm talking about. When you look at the Christmas scene right here, I asked myself, if you look at the whole nativity scene, you got Mary and Joseph, and you got the wise men, you got the shepherds, all those people there. You know this scene, right? You've seen this scene? Yeah, okay. This scene right here. I asked myself, how did all these people get coordinated by God about what happened during the birth of Jesus? So when you look through, for instance, we got the wise guys on the left over there. Wise men, I mean. The wise men on the left, and the wise men came. How did God coordinate them to be there? Do you remember? Stars, the stars, right. So they came from the east, they saw the star, and we won't get into that today, but that's a fascinating research topic all by itself, and I did some of that a while ago. Also, let's look at the shepherds. How did the shepherds get coordinated into the affair? Angels, right? And it totally freaked them out. They're out there in the dark with the sheep, and all of a sudden, right? So I don't think that was quite the sound, but it's probably close to that. And then I pulled back before. Zacharias, the father of John the Baptist, he's in the story in Luke, and this is 6 months prior. How did Zacharias get tied into the story? Do you remember? Angel. By name? Gabriel, yeah. So he goes into the temple, has a discussion with the angel, and it's the angel Gabriel. And then it suddenly dawned on me, well, you know who else was tied into this story like several centuries before? Daniel. Daniel was tied into this story because he actually predicted the coming of the Mashiach Negid, the Messiah Prince. How did he get tied into the story?
Also an angel.
An angel named Gabriel. Same angel. Same angel. And then it dawned on me, what about Mary? How did she get tied into the story? Angel Gabriel. Yeah, Gabriel is really tied up with the whole idea of the announcing of the coming of Messiah. So he not only talked to Daniel several centuries before, who predicted when it was going to happen. Daniel actually came up with a prophecy from God that predicted the very day that Jesus rode in on that horse into Jerusalem. And so that happened. And then Zechariah 6 months before, and then Mary herself. And that brings us to Joseph. How did he get tied into the story? I'm dreaming of a white girl. Yeah, dreams. So that's why I thought, ha! So the dreamy thinking for Christmas may be weird secularly, but it's on the mark, at least when you look at Joseph. And so they're always raised for me a bunch of questions. Why did everyone get a Gabriel appearance and Joseph gets a dream? So, I mean, let's just look at it. Let me just review the passages, because many people don't realize how much Joseph was communicated to in dreams. So let's look. Matthew 1:18. Now the birth of Jesus Christ took place in this way. When his mother Mary had been betrothed to Joseph, that's like engaged, before they came together, she was found to be with child from the Holy Spirit. And her husband Joseph, being a just man, unwilling to put her to shame, resolved to divorce her quietly. That was actually the very noble thing to do, because she was going to be quite ridiculed and humiliated, having become pregnant before she's married to Joseph. So the decent thing to do, he's not trying to get out from under marrying her, but the decent thing to do is to get her out of visibility in the village and let her have the baby. Yeah. So, I mean, he's not shirking it, but this seemed like the right thing to do. But as he considered these things, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared to him in a dream. Hey, okay, so we're in a dream. It was an angel, but it was in a dream. Okay? Saying this, Joseph, son of David, don't fear to take Mary as your wife, for that which is conceived in her is from the Holy Spirit. She will bear a son, and you will call his name Jesus, for he will save his people from their sins. You know the name Jesus actually means that? Yeshua? It means, God saves. So he'll save his people from the sins. All this took place to fulfill what the Lord had spoken by the prophet. Behold, the virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and they shall call his name Emmanuel. So Matthew in his account here is telling us this is all to fulfill Isaiah 7, verse 14. So, okay, so that makes sense. So Joseph is brought into the action through a dream, and in the dream, there's an angel telling him, don't divorce her, don't put her away. What's going on is the Holy Spirit. Oh, okay. How about when it goes on, Joseph woke from the sleep, and he actually did as the angel of the Lord commanded him. He took his wife, which means he married her, but he knew her not until she had given birth to a son, and then finally he called his name Jesus. He did everything according to what the angel said in the dream. In the dream. Now, at this point, I think about my dreams. Man, they are goofy. I had one this morning, and I woke up thinking that actually happened, and then it takes you about 2 steps out of bed to go, oh, no, that didn't happen. What am I talking about? But it's goofy. So this whole idea of God coordinating and sending his message through dreams seems like it's kind of goofy to me, but what we're saying right here is the fact that no, God can use your sleeping moments even when you're unconscious to somehow communicate to you profound truth that you need to act on. That's just a crazy idea to most of us in modern day. It's like, well, did this happen just now? Just once? No. Check this out. Matthew 2, the story goes on. Now, when they had departed, the wise men departed, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream. There it is again. And said, rise, take the child and his mother, flee to Egypt, and remain there until I tell you, for Herod is about to search for the child to destroy him. Wow, that's very practical. Because he wouldn't know that Herod's soon going to put down the hammer and he's going to kill all these babies. So, in a dream, he's instructed, vamoose to Egypt. That's really important. And he rose, took the child and his mother by night, and departed to Egypt, and remained there until the death of Herod. Yeah, wow, very practical. This was to fulfill what the Lord had spoken by the prophet, out of Egypt I called my son. That's in Hosea 11. Which, by the way, it's an interesting connection, because Hosea's prophecy actually applies to the nation of Israel, but it also applies to Jesus. Why is it the two and not just the one? Well, Israel itself as a nation was called God's son through the Old Testament. And in fact, if the Messiah had come during the time of Jesus, okay, which he did, and the Jews says, you can't be the Messiah because you didn't come out of Egypt, they would quote Hosea 11. And they could do their snappy comeback and say, well, no, that's actually not true. He was in Egypt. So this is by way of saying, I don't want you to miss this. There's a lot of prophecies that come out of the Old Testament that don't have a single fulfillment. They have 2 valid fulfillments. One of them's a precursor to the other. It happens all the time. All the time. So we call them a dualism in prophetic fulfillment. And it's just kind of interesting. And here's one of those. Okay, there's another one. Matthew 2, as the story goes on with Joseph. Verse 19, but when Herod died, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared to him in a dream. This is working pretty good. In a dream to Joseph in Egypt, saying what? Well, saying this, rise, take the child and his mother, go to the land of Israel, for those who sought the child's life are dead. See, how would he know if he's in Egypt when Herod's gone? Well, an angel comes from him in a dream and says, he's gone. Okay, so he rose. I love his actions. He just does it. He rose, took the child and his mother, and went to the land of Israel. This is extraordinarily practical. I mean, almost more practical than having a flaming angel standing at the foot of your bed at night. I mean, this is very calm and practical and necessary, because if this message is tainted at all, they could go back to Israel when Herod, he's got his knives out for all these babies, he'd be a huge danger. And how would he know? Well, the angel says the coast is clear, literally. And then it goes on, Matthew 2, the story goes on. But when he heard that Archelaus was reigning over Judea in place of his father, Herod, well, he was afraid to go there. Well, he was afraid to go when Herod was there, because Herod had a track record of killing the babies. But if you do a little research on Archelaus, who was one of the sons, basically, who took over the kingdom. They sliced up the kingdom after Herod died, and the sons took chunks of it. Archelaus was a bad guy. I mean, you take the worst of Herod, and Archelaus inherits the worst of Herod. He's a terror. He's an absolute terror. But not all the sons of Herod are terrors. So the different regions of Palestine where they took over rule, they kind of split things up. In the southern part, in Judea, where Archelaus was, it was horrible. It was still really bad. But there were other sons, especially the son in the north that took the northern half, who were relatively decent guys. So, being warned in a dream, He withdrew to the district of Galilee because that's where the really nice son ruled up there. It's also kind of hometown for him. So he goes to Galilee, and he went and he lived in a city called Nazareth, so that what was spoken by the prophets might be fulfilled, that he would be called a Nazarene. Now, just as an aside right there, you won't find anywhere in the Old Testament that says the Messiah is a Nazarene. And this has caused a lot of consternation amongst Bible scholars. Well, he'd be called a Nazarene. And there's several explanations for this, but in general, when you say someone's a Nazarene, you're in a general sense saying they're a hick. They're from Nowheresville. They have no royal city that they were born in or anything like that. So many people believe that when he says he's a Nazarene, he's basically saying the Messiah is going to come from Hicksville. He's going to come from the Tule. He's going to come from way out in nowhere land. He doesn't come from a royal place like Jerusalem, because everyone is expecting when the Messiah comes, since he rules Israel and since Jerusalem is the city of God, of course he will come from Jerusalem. No, he'll come from nowhere's land. And you do find that in the Old Testament, that there's just no distinctiveness about where he comes from. So that's how most people explain that. So there we have 4 cases where in very, very pragmatic and logical ways, Joseph is sleeping, and is brought into a pivotal position to be part of the whole nativity story. Through sleeping, not through angels. And so it causes me to start thinking about these dreams. Like, is there an advantage actually of getting your information in dreams rather than by an angel? Well, I think there sort of is in some cases, and it depends on the person. Yeah. It depends on the person. Like, for instance, let me just, this is thinking out loud, probably you can come up with some of these. I looked back at how dreams played a factor in the Old Testament. Well, and this is most of them, but not all of them. Like, for instance, back in Genesis 20, God protects Sarah by confronting Abimelech in a dream. You remember that story? That's where, man. This is where Abraham says, as he's traveling with Sarah, his wife, he's traveling with Sarah in these kind of crazy lands. He says, look, if they come upon us and they see us, and they see you because you are so beautiful, drop dead gorgeous, Sarah evidently was. He says they'll see you, and because the kings in these areas will take women that are beautiful to them because they want them. But what they'll do first, because they want to be honorable, how they take the women, they'll make sure that they're not married women. Because it's honorable to take women if they're not married. Right? But you are married, Abraham says. So if this starts to come down on us, tell them we're not married. Well, what would that do? Well, then they can take you, and they won't kill me so they can take you. Isn't that just a wonderful idea? To save his own skin, Abraham told Sarah, tell them that we're not married, and they'll take you, and I won't die. That's what's important. Now, Abraham didn't do this once. He did it twice. Separated by many chapters in Genesis. This is the second one, I believe. I think the first one's much earlier than this. But I mean, did you guys hit that already, Steve?
We did the first one, haven't got to the second one.
Was it in 12, chapter 12? Okay, I couldn't remember what it was. Yeah. So this happens twice. In this particular case, well, both cases, Sarah does get taken by the powerful guys who see her beauty. She gets taken right off the darn camel. She gets taken into the king's place, and whoosh, she's gone. And there she's all by herself, defenseless in the face of Pharaoh one time, and then Abimelech another time. And in this particular case, Abimelech, who's the king who took her, who puts her in his harem, in a dream, God says, don't you dare touch her. He is so freaked out. So dreams work. He is so freaked out. He returns Sarah to the owner, and he comes back and he rails at Abraham, saying, what were you thinking? You allowed me to take your wife, and then God came to me in a dream, and I'm toast if I don't return her to you. So get her out of here. Get her out of here. This happens twice. You got to go read this. This is great drama. It's great.
I got to say, Sarah's 99 at that point.
She's 99. She is. She's very old. And yet still the narrative says she's beautiful and desirable, and she gets taken twice. Snatched right off the camel twice. Well, this is how God confronts Abimelech in a dream. And it so freaks him out, and he's scared for his life, and he's scared for his entire household in this dream. He returns her toot sweet, and she's back on the camel, and she's out of there. In fact, I think it's Steve, correct me, I haven't read this. I think in the Pharaoh case, which is the first one, the Pharaoh case, doesn't he actually escort them out of the area? Is that one? Yeah, okay.
Makes them rich.
It makes them rich, gives them money, says, here, let's forget about this. What do you say? Let's forget about this. What do you say? And by the way, I've got all these guys who are going to escort you to the boundary so we make sure you're out of here. That's how freaked they were. You got to read this stuff. Genesis is worth it. If you're not in the men's group, they're studying Genesis, you ought to be, because Genesis is a trip. It's really a trip. Okay, there's one time. Later on, remember Jacob's ladder with the angels going up and down? That was a dream. That was a dream. It says it was a dream. You'll have to go there yourself and figure out what that means. Genesis 31, Jacob again, he learns while he's with his father-in-law, he learns about mating the flock, his goat and sheep flock. So there's an increase. And if you know that story, there's a way in which Jacob is kind of a shyster. Okay, there's the word. He's a sharp kind of manipulator. But anyway, in a dream, God tells him how to increase his flocks in such a way that he can kind of maneuver with his father-in-law. It's a very interesting story. It was in a dream. God tells him in a dream how to do goat husbandry. I don't know. Okay, later on in that same chapter, his father-in-law, who he's trying to get away from, God warns Laban, the father-in-law, not to confront Jacob. Don't get in his face. So that was through a dream. It worked. And Laban was scared to death. 37, Joseph. Remember Joseph, the second youngest son? Joseph is told about his coming authority over his brothers. And he shares that with his brothers, and that gets him into a lot of deep doo-doo. Because they say, what, you're number 11 in the son line, and you're going to be over us? I don't think so. But he shares this with them, and it came in a dream. He shares the dream with them. He said, well, clearly this is the interpretation of the dream, and you guys are bound down to me, and I don't know how. So he just tells them the truth, gets him in a load of trouble, and gets him in a caravan to Egypt. And he's sold as a slave by the Midianite traders to the Egyptians. And it's because of this dream, that he shares with his brothers, that he gets into deep weeds with his brothers. So it was effective too. By the way, without that dream happening, and without the bad response of his brothers, millions of people would have died because of the famine that came later. So when you think that you're suffering, inequity, and this is not right, and this is not fair, it could very well be that in God's agenda, much more is being saved than it comes to your mind. So that was through a dream. Is there more? Oh, yeah, it just keeps going. In chapter 40, very famous, Joseph interprets the dreams of Pharaoh's servants. Remember, he's locked up in a jail, and the servants have these crazy dreams, and Joseph says, well, here's the interpretation. It's interesting, too, because in this case, Joseph says, I'm not making this up, or I don't have any special juju or whatever it is. I'm getting this from God. So this is what God says that means. And it's an interesting outcomes for those two servants. Also, later on, when Joseph is coming up in power, God foretells the coming famine to Pharaoh in a dream. He gives this dream to Pharaoh, and then Pharaoh brings it to Joseph, and Joseph interprets the dream, and as a result of that, he's promoted. And as a result of that, millions of people's lives are saved because the famine is averted. So, and that all started with a dream to Pharaoh that Joseph interpreted. That dream, God interceded with what was going on. Is there more? Well, yes, there is. I'm glad you asked. Judges, which is a crazy graphic novel of a book in the Old Testament. If you've not read Judges, you have not lived. It's really something. But Judges 7, Gideon, you know the story of Gideon. Gideon learns that the Lord has given Midian into his hands through a dream. And then he acts based on that dream. It's fascinating, just through a dream. Go read it if you don't know how that ends. Daniel, we talked about Daniel a second ago. Right at the start of Daniel's book, we were told that God gave Daniel understanding of dreams. That was an important thing. Daniel himself also, in a very humble way, says, it's not a gift I have, basically. God just tells me these things and he interprets them. And he had some pretty big dreams to interpret when he was there in Babylonian captivity. In chapters 2 through 4, Daniel Daniel does indeed interpret Nebuchadnezzar's troubling dream, and you should read about that. I mean, it very much troubled Nebuchadnezzar, what he dreamed. And he brought it to Daniel and said, so what does this mean? And Daniel told him, and more troubling things come after that. But it was very accurate. Later on in Daniel 7, oh my gosh, Daniel saw a dream about the succeeding world empires. Remember that statue that had clay and iron and all that kind of stuff? Well, many critics of the Bible say that is just too darn accurate to match the coming world groups that came by. It must have been written after all of those kingdoms came, because it's just a little too accurate. Well, no, it was written before. It was written before. Crazy thing. Also, if I jump into the New Testament, remember in Acts 16, Paul's on one of his missionary journeys. He's trying to go up to North Turkey, northern Turkey coast. Can't get there, and so he comes down to Troas, which is a little port town, on the left edge of Turkey. And while he's at Troas, kind of killing time, he has a dream. And in the dream, he gets concrete information, and there's a vision. He has this vision in the night, it says, and the vision in the night is a man in Macedonia, which is the upper part of where Greece hits the continent, up in Macedonia, a man saying, come this way, and Paul wakes up and says, okay, and they take off to Macedonia. It's crazy. So dreams are actually quite operable in the Old and in the New Testament. However, today we're a little skeptical when someone says, psst, I had this dream. Yeah, I'm sure you did. Because we all know that our dreams can be kind of goofy. However, it's an interesting thing. I'll always give a listen, because this kind of history of dreams and how God communicates to man, there's some powerful things that happen. Now, he may not do it all the time. I didn't have one last night. Did you have one last night? Did you have a dream from God last night? Anybody? No. Oh, okay. So, but there's something here. And then I asked myself, well, how about dreams today? Do dreams have a role of God today in what's going on? You don't see too much in the modern church, in the Western church, but when you turn your gaze toward Arabic-dominated Muslim countries, you see it actually going on a lot. There are a lot of accounts, and I chased a bunch of these down, where because they're in closed countries where missionaries can't go in and talk about who Jesus is, that doesn't stop Jesus. He's coming to them in dreams. And these are producing real fruit in the lives of these people. I mean, real change is happening after they have these encounters with Jesus. And I've got a couple of friends who actually minister around the edges of parts of the Arabic East. And they say, yeah, this seems to be somewhat routine. We'll go to a place and we'll find that there are already believers in Jesus. And we'll say, how did that happen? Well, I had a dream. And there was Jesus. So this is going on today. He has not stopped by the boundaries of closed countries and stuff like that, and seems to elect to use dreams. So that's kind of an interesting thing. And even more to home, he uses that here as well in Utah. I put up here an ex-Mormon friend of ours, Grant Palmer, and Grant was a very stalwart Mormon for many, many years. I think 3 to 4 decades. He was professionally, his job was to work for the Church Educational Service, which provided curriculum for seminaries and for institutes at the college level for the church and all that kind of stuff. I mean, he was in pretty deep into the Mormon church. And then he started to have some troubling discoveries about the true nature of Jesus, not about the history of the church, but he's just reading New Testament stuff, and then has a profound dream. And if you've never heard Grant's dream, by the way, some of you might have met Grant. He came here once or twice, I think it was, several years ago now. He came here, he was at our house a little bit, and we met him through Doris and Earl, but he came here. In fact, he said a wonderful thing after he was with you, I think the first Sunday among you. He says, I met so many nice people here. If I didn't live in Salt Lake City and I lived up here, I would be going to be with your people at Main Street Church. So I would much rather be here. Grant's since then passed on. If you haven't heard his story about how God used a dream, well, go to this. I forgot to change this. Down here, this website, you can go to Sacred Groves online, or you can go to sacredgroves.net. It'll take you there eventually anyway. And if you've never been on our Sacred Groves website, Scott Johnson has done just a miraculous job compiling long format interviews. Some of them go 90 minutes to 2 hours. I mean, long format interviews. And this one that we recorded with Grant about 6 years ago is stunning. It's a little long. It's like an hour and a half, something like that. But somewhere at the end of the first third of it, around I forget. I think it was minute 48 if you're taking notes. But somewhere in there, he starts into this dream that he had, and that coupled together with what he was reading in the New Testament changed his entire attitude. Not really so much about the Mormon Church, but about the fact that maybe we're not talking enough about Jesus. And in the process, after that point, he asked the people that he worked for in CES if he could be free from having to teach Mormon doctrine in institute classes. And of course they said, well, you can't do that. You got to teach Mormon doctrine. And he says, well, what if I just teach the New Testament? And they said, well, funny you should mention that. It turns out that there's an opening at the Salt Lake County Jail for a guy to be in there. What's a chaplain? To be a chaplain in there. And so you have to be kind of multiple duty. You can't just be LDS. You got to be kind of generic Christian. So it turns out if all you want to do is teach the New Testament and teach who Jesus is, that actually satisfies the job requirement to be in the county jail. And so he was in the county jail teaching about Jesus for I think 13 or 14 years, he said. And he says that was just such a great and graceful way that God allowed for me to be able to continue my job in CES, but all I talked about was Jesus. And he became a believer for real, in all of this. Yeah, Phyllis.
If I talk to Joe and Jenny about nothing except about Jesus, you think I would have a chance of...
Maybe. I would have her watch this, if she can. This is it's a great first-hand account of what happened in his life.
You'll have to write that down because I won't be there.
Yeah. Go to sacredgroves.net or sacredgrovesonline.org, either one. Look for Grant Palmer. By the way, if you haven't been in Utah for very long, Grant made a gigantic tidal wave splash in the culture of Mormon Utah by writing a book in 2003, I think it was, 2002. It's called An Insider's View of the Book of Mormon Origins. And from a historical research perspective, it was really quite something. And he's a mainstream guy in the Mormon Church. In the end, in a very gentle way, he was trying to influence the church to be more Christ-centric. And I remember listening to him on a KRCL broadcast, that's the local public radio, and they asked him about the time that his book came out in 2003 and said, if you could change anything in the Mormon Church, based on what you're telling, what would you change? Because he wasn't saying get out of the church. I just want to change the church. He says, you know what I would change? He would say, look, this is what we do in our normal rotation of Sunday school in the Mormon Church. We go through this 4-year cycle. Now, 4 years because we have 4 standard works, and 1 year we do the Bible, 1 year we do Doctrine and Covenants, and 1 year we do Pearl of Great Price, and 1 year we do, so he goes to the Book of Mormon. So you go through this rotation. So he says, we only get to the Bible once every 4 years. And then in that 1 year of Sunday school, you do both the Old and the New Testament. So the New Testament is about a third of the year, maybe 4 months if you're lucky. And in those 4 months, you just get brief glimpses of Jesus in there. And he said, that is just not enough. I like the idea of doing a 4-year rotation in Sunday school, but I prefer what we should do if I was the president of the church is that year 1, we'd study Matthew, year 2, we'd do Mark, year 3, we'd do Luke, and then we'd do John, and then we'd go back to Matthew again. and he says, what we need is Jesus. We need Jesus in the Mormon Church. So, so I would highly recommend, if you haven't heard his testimony, I listened to it again just 2 days ago because I'd forgotten what was in it, and I came to tears in a couple spots. It's just, and I was sitting here asking him questions behind the camera, and I'd just forgotten what we asked him. So anyway, so it's happening today, and Grant's not the only one in different communities in the country, not only just in Mormon communities, where Jesus is coming and saying, here I am. And instead of waking up and saying, well, that was weird, it must have been my pizza last night, they wake up and they're profoundly changed. inside. Something switches in the track of life that they're on. So if you think that dreams are kind of it's probably most appropriate during the time of Christmas to be dreamy, because God used dreams with Joseph. God used dreams with many people in the past. I mean, it may actually be part of the backbone of Christmas, not about sugar plums dancing in your head or a white Christmas, but a dreaminess about the fact that what happened in the birth of Jesus is almost like a dream. Not that it's not real, but it's like, it's so fantastic. It's like a dream almost. Let me do a little bit more analysis before I push on that a little bit more. So why dreams of Joseph in specific? Okay, why didn't he just get a Gabriel visit? That seems like to me, if I was writing the Bible, Mary gets Gabriel, Joseph gets Gabriel, Zacharias gets Gabriel, everyone gets Gabriel. No. Well, here's a couple of speculations, and maybe you've got your own. Well, it does avoid the fearful response to the angel. You remember the response Mary had when the angel shows up? Ah! Ah! Zacharias? Ah! Angels? Ah! It's freaky. It's freaky. And you know, if you've ever been in a situation where you're totally freaked out by something, you don't think clearly for the next half hour. I mean, it's like you catch a small percentage of what they say to you when that happens. And you know, I've always giggled. It'd be fun to do a skit about the shepherds and the angels, and they're so freaked out. I mean, it's really quite profound how freaked out they are by the angel. Yeah, then the pitch black, and then there's light and stuff like that. But I always had this freaky idea that the angels came, ah! They go, ah! And they say something, and then they're gone, and it's black again. And in Jim's strange, twisted version of the Bible, I see one shepherd turn to the upper shepherd and say, "Now where are we supposed to go?" Because the whole time you just, if you're like me, you don't remember much. So getting around that fearful response was probably a good thing for Joseph. Now, I think Joseph had other things that were messing up his head, that he couldn't handle more things messing up his head. Because come on, he was in the middle of this entire thing where suddenly this wonderful young woman who he's betrothed to, he's engaged to. By the way, they go through like a year engagement before they get married. But it's tantamount to being married, just without, you know, all the stuff that goes with that. You know, that whole idea that he comes home one day and she says, "Guess what? I'm pregnant." And he's thinking, well, not by me, which means by somebody else. So think about what kind of turmoil that creates in his head. And his heart's kind of ripping around like this. And I mean, that's just messing with his head. I think to some degree, God says, I don't think you need more turmoil in your head. So let's not do a guest appearance of Gabriel. What do you say? So I think this is part of it. This is Jim's speculation. Maybe you've got more. It turns out that in this way, the details were more clarified. They're more memorable. In traumatic situations, you don't remember a lot. Shepherd A. So they said go to a manger? You mean an eating thing? Is that what they said? I don't know. I didn't hear that. Did you hear that? Well, that's what I heard. You know, it's just like, it scrambles. I think this is a way in which God could give a very clear, detailed message to a mind that's finally resting. That's finally resting. And there's some application in that for us, because I think that you receive God's messages most deeply and with greater comprehension when your mind is not distracted by other things. You know that still small voice? I think it's louder in this context. So rest that he's in at that point, it sort of silences the competing inner voice of stress and of turmoil. I think that was a gracious thing that God did for Joseph in that particular way. The still small voice, it just happens to be louder in the silence. And so in a comical way, God says to the angels, tell you what, let's wait till he goes to sleep, and then we'll dump it on him. Because he'll be able to hear us. And so he's sleeping, and God goes, and he gets it. Clear as day, he gets it. I love that. And also there's the fact that his name Joseph is somewhat like the name Joseph, the son of Jacob, who was called by his brothers the dreamer. So it could very well be that for Joseph and Joseph, the Joseph with Joseph and Mary, it's like, I had a dream, but that makes sense because my name's Joseph, so I'll trust what I hear. I don't know what connection that is, but that is pretty interesting. Out of all the people in the Old Testament, the only one who was called a dreamer was named Joseph. Of course, his brothers use that in a derogatory way. You dreamer. Yeah, right, okay. And then finally, there's Joel 2:28. You know what Joel 2:28 says? We've read this before. It's a very famous Old Testament passage. And it'll come to pass afterward that I will pour out my spirit on all flesh. That's Pentecost. I'll pour out my spirit on all flesh. Your sons and your daughters shall prophesy. Your old men shall dream dreams, and your young men shall see visions. Now, I think there's old men get dreams, young men get visions. Because I think the young men can handle the blood pressure rise when you see Gabriel. You know, and they won't fall over dead. And the old men will just dream it and go, I had this dream last night. You know what I'm saying? That's kind of it's a fitting thing. If it was reversed where it says the old men see Gabriel and the young men have dreams, that wouldn't make sense to me, but this makes sense to me. This makes sense to me. It's a practical way in which God gets his message across to Joseph in a way that's very suitable to him. Now, if you are frustrated by the fact that you never hear messages from God, you probably think, I'm not doing something right. You know, I must have to do something different to kind of second guess what God wants me to do. Maybe if I fast today, or maybe if I stop eating pizza for a month, or maybe if I do something, I can sort of coerce God so that he'll give me a message that I can understand. You don't have to do any of that stuff. When God needs to communicate to you, he knows how you're built, he'll get you the message. He'll get you the message. And it'll be suitable to you. And I think in this case with Joseph, that the dreams are exactly the way to do that. Now, I haven't had, well, I can't say that. I've had one dream. I've never told anyone this, and I'm not going to tell you what was in the dream. But I've had one dream that I'm convinced came from God. Without a question, came from God. And it changed a lot in my life. I mean, I was profoundly different after this dream. I can't tell you what it is. But it was real, and I never questioned it, and it was just, I mean, I woke up and said, well, that was from God. Now I got to do something about that. It's really profound. But I've had more waking communications with God than I have dreaming communications. And that's just me, I think, because, you know, I can walk and I'm praying while I'm walking and we have a discussion with God and I actually have answers. Sometimes I can document maybe 4 times, maybe 5 in my life where these waking conversations, they were answers. And these answers profoundly changed the course and direction of my life. Some of them I've talked about before, so I won't tell you all of them. But for me, I'm just saying it didn't take a dream. I was in good enough mental shape that God says, well, here, I'll just lay this on you. Now, one of them, and I'll tell you just briefly about it, was when he pulled me out of working in the electronics industry and going to ministry full time. And after the entire event happened, when I came and saw Dorothy next, she looked at me and she says, have you been mugged? Because I was physically messed up by it. I mean, you know, and I said, why would you say that? I didn't even tell her what happened. Why would you say that? Well, because you look like you've been mugged. And then, kind of the flippant-tongued guy I am, I said, well, in a manner of speaking, I think I have been. And God basically said, you're going to leave your career of 20 years and you're going to go in ministry full-time. At the time, I was an up-and-comer, rising golden boy at Hewlett-Packard. I worked for vice presidents. I mean, there was a career path. Let's put it that way. God said, nope, that's all. The end. The end. Well, why does someone leave a job like that they enjoy so much, that they're getting overpaid for, recognition and money, and I was traveling to Europe every 6 weeks working on a project. I mean, you know, I was really engaged in things. How do you stop that? How do you bring that to an end and switch over and start working with 5th grade boys and junior hires? Well, God stopped me in my tracks, and he said some things, and I argued with him, and I said, no, not going to do that. Kept walking, and I argued with him all the way for about an hour. I argued with him, said that's just not going to work. And then at the end of that conversation, I got to a point where I had to go back to where Dorothy was. We were at a hotel at the time, and I was on a beach. I was turning, and I realized at this point where I was going to turn off the beach that I probably had to close this conversation with God. I had resisted him all the way through this hour walk on the beach, and I said, well, God, let me make my last case. Here's my point I'm trying to say to you, God. My point is this. What I do right now is because of who I am. I am an engineer in heart. I love engineering. I love working with people. I love everything that I do right now. And that is primarily who I am. That is me. Whew. And then this voice said, well, you haven't got a clue who you are. Well, he's right. How can you argue against that? I mean, how can you argue against that? And at that point, I must have looked mugged, because then I realized there was truth to this. So God can communicate to you when he needs to, and he has no problem. Look, the burden of responsibility in the communication from God does not lie on your shoulders. It's his deal. So he'll get it to you. Now, if you can withstand an angel Gabriel shining in your bedroom, and you can withstand that without falling over with a heart attack, that's what he'll do. If he needs to get your attention some kind of way, that's what he'll do. If he needs to do something radical in your life, he'll figure out how to do that. Maybe sometimes, and this has happened with a lot of people, you're reading a single verse of Scripture, which really shouldn't have a shred of connection to where you're going to go next. But you read it, and God says, what do you think? And you go, oh! That's more common, happens to many of us. And was that kind of a finger of God? Well, yeah, it was. It really was. That happens a lot with those of us. We look at his word and he highlights, and that happens a lot. So look, you don't have to second guess God. Now, what if you're up at a junction in the road and you got a choice in front of you and you're trying to figure out, how do I discern the will of God? How do I find out what he wants me to do? God, do I go left? Do I go right? Should I somehow, throw sticks on the ground and see how they stack up and divine what they mean? Or do I do tea leaves in a cup and try and figure that out? I mean, how do I discern the will of God? Why is God so silent? I got to go A or B. God, what am I supposed to do? What am I supposed to do? What am I supposed to do? Have you ever? I've been in that position. Well, you got to calm your heart and say, God, this is on you. I know that you will tell me what you want, because my heart is in a position of saying, not my will, but yours be done. So whatever appropriate measure works, I'll go with it. But now that's your responsibility. I'll rest my heart and I'll listen. It's really more an issue of listening, because when you're trying to coerce the will of God, you're talking an awful lot. And when you're talking an awful lot, at least in your head, you got to turn that off. So maybe he'll wait for you to go to sleep. I don't know. But God can communicate to you quite clearly if you rest your heart and you look to him for an answer and you wait on the Lord. You wait on the Lord. I could tell you stories, and you could probably too. So he's alive. He's interested in the course of our lives and the path of our life. He knows where the path of your life is. Listen to him, and he'll set your ways. The steps of a man, the psalm says, the steps of a man are established by the Lord, and he delights in his way. And the psalm goes on, and if you should fall, you'll not be hurled headlong, because the Lord's the one who's holding your hand. So he's got this. You don't have to do crazy stuff. Okay. This is where I sort of wanted to leave us this morning. Why dreams? Well, because for generations of Jews, they've dreamt of the coming of the Messiah. I mean, in a generic sense, they've dreamt of it. And you got to really get the dreamy sense of Christmas, you got to put yourself in the shoes of the first century Jews. I mean, you think about the history of the Jews. If you wind back 1,000 years from the time of Jesus back to the time of David, they had this country finally that lived in the land of milk and honey, that finally had a king who was really, really someone, a man after God's own heart. It was like a golden age. Now, David wasn't a perfect guy, but in many respects, respects, he was like a type of who the Messiah king would be, which is why later on God said, when the Messiah comes, he's going to be from the house of David, because he's kind of going to be like David was. Well, at the time of Jesus, that was 1,000 years ago. That was 1,000 years ago. And the Jews living in Palestine said, remember the good old days when David was king? David was king, and everything was wonderful, and things were just, and then David dies, and Solomon was king. Yeah! Then Solomon goes south. Boo! And then after Solomon dies, there's a gross division in the country, the north and south division, and some people follow one of the sons in south and one in the north. And from that point on, things just go from bad to worse. And then about 200 years later, the Assyrians come in from the north and decide to take away the people in the northern kingdom, and that's really bad. And then about 150 years later, the Babylonians under Nebuchadnezzar, he invades, he takes the rest of them out from Jerusalem and stuff, and they're all gone, and it's just devastation. Devastation. 500 years after David, devastation. The land is hollow. There's no leadership. But God, what about this Mashiach Negid that Daniel said would come all powerful, and this Messiah would run our country, and he'd be after God's own heart? When will those days return? 500 years after David, they're praying this over and over. Well, they come back from Babylon after 70 years. The nation is restored to some degree. The people who had taken the Assyrian captivity come back intermarried with the Syrians. It's kind of a bad deal. But they sort of trickle back in. But through those last 400 to 500 years before Jesus, there's still this aching. There's this aching for the Messiah. And then Alexander the Great comes through in the 300s. And they're taken over by Alexander the Great. And it's a horrible experience. And not too far after that, there's a little bit of Medo-Persian influence. And then a little after that, you got the Romans coming in. And then when will we have our Messiah King? The one who will make us live in peace and in harmony and will keep our enemies out. When is that King coming? We need the Messiah. And that went on for 100 years, and then 200 years, and 300 years, and 400 years. And now we're 1,000 years after David. And the nation of Israel is dreaming about the coming of the Messiah. Just one day he will come. It was on everybody's lips. One day he will come and everything will change. It's like a dream. I can see it in my mind's eye. Now, interestingly enough, when they came back from the captivities, Assyrian and Babylonian, it was also when they finally came back to the land after generations of being gone. When they came back in the land, they said, it is going to be kind of like this. Remember when we came back from Babylon? It's like we were dreaming. I mean, we're back home. Can you believe this? This is the best news ever. And yet it still continued to be bad in many senses. But there were psalms that were written about the fact that this anticipation, this dreaming of the peaceful, powerful Messiah, when they came back to the land, they wrote these psalms. It was like we were dreaming. I mean, it's such good news. It's such good news. And this is kind of the spirit that I want us to leave with today. Because this idea where they just dreamt and leaned forward for the coming Messiah, that's the attitude at the birth of Jesus. When will the Messiah come? When will he rule with peace and with love? It's been hundreds of years, and the promise remains. When will he come? So many of them, it was a dream. And for those who recognized who this baby was, it was a dream come true. After all those hundreds of years, look at this. This dream is coming true. Christmas is dreamy because this dream is coming true. There was a time at the beginning of the birth of Jesus where you see it poke out in different people, this excitement about the birth. Like, we've been waiting hundreds of years. I mean, in a sense, maybe 1,000 years since David. We've been waiting this long, and look, it's happened. This is why you see so much enthusiasm from the angels when they're over the shepherds. I mean, they're just busting a gut. They're like, hundreds of years, and here we are. Aren't you guys excited? No, we're freaked out, man. Can you turn down the light? Golly, And they're just excited. You see this excitement from heaven when you see the angels. By the way, that angel story, it starts with one angel with the shepherds, right? Boom. One angel, totally freaked. And he says a few things, and then suddenly the host of heaven was there. It's like you go to a play, and they open the curtain about this wide so that one character can stand there, and then after he says his stuff, you pull the whole curtain aside, And suddenly the skies are full because the host of heaven are so darn excited they just can't hold it in. Glory to God in the highest, right? I mean, they're just, whoa! They're more excited than everyone on the ground is. But you do see a couple people on the ground who get excited. This dream come true. Here's one of them. Remember Anna and Simeon? When Jesus is brought, when he's 8 days old, to the temple, Anna comes up, and coming up at that very hour, she began to give thanks to God and to speak of him to all who were waiting for the redemption of Israel. All who were waiting for him. I've dreamt of this day. And she could go around and say, well, your dreams have come true. The Messiah is born. Wow, really? Now, it's unfortunate that in our modern day, when we think about Christmas, we don't have any of this excitement at all. Just to have none of it at all. It's all about the presents that I haven't bought yet. It's all about the hubbub of what has to go on. But for the Jews at the time, the birth of this Messiah was like a dream come true. Hundreds of years we've waited. We've waited. We've waited. And here he is.
We're still waiting.
And we're still waiting for the second.
Yes,
Yeah.
we're waiting
Yeah.
for the Lord.
But this ought to, I was trying to recreate this idea in our hearts today, and I'm going to do it a certain way. I want to show you this psalm right here. This is a psalm that was written when the captivity of the Jews off in Babylon came back home, and for them it's like a dream. We're back where we wanted to go back to. God has restored to us life and a place to live. And they were so excited they wrote a handful of psalms about the return back to Israel. And this is one that was written with that very idea that God has given us life after such a long period. And this is what the psalm says. When the Lord restored the fortunes of Zion, we were like those who dream. Hey, pinch me. Am I dreaming? This is the best thing ever. We're back in our land. We're back to life. We're out of captivity. And by the way, the birth of Jesus, you're back in the land and you're out of captivity of sin. So this guy has a really strong parallel. We were like those who dream. Our mouth was filled with laughter and our tongue with shouts of joy. And then they said among the nations they said, the Lord has done great things for them. And the Lord has done great things for us. And we're glad. That's what Jesus in the manger means. Is that. Pinch me. Am I dreaming? This is a dream come true. You mean God come to earth? The Messiah is here? Are you kidding me, really? For the Jews, after hundreds of years of waiting, he's finally here? Our mouths are filled with laughter and our tongues with joy. I mean, this is the Messiah. Finally. Some caught it and some didn't. But the ones who caught it spread that enthusiasm everywhere they went. I remember Andrew when he got his brother Peter. We found the Messiah. We found this is the guy we've been waiting about all this time. We found him. Peter said, "Yeah, I don't think so." But he came around after a while. So what I'm going to do for you is, as we think about the fact that this actual restoration to life, this kind of what we thought we were dreaming, is such good news. A very good friend of ours that we used to sing with, and I told you about them at the beginning this morning. He wrote a song that's based around Psalm 126. And I've been using it this Christmas season to try and help me to get back to the anticipation fulfilled in the coming of Jesus in this manger. And he uses the words of this great return that God has brought to the nation of Israel. It just, these two ideas seem to fit so well to me. The return to the land, the return to life, the return to a place where God himself is king. And this king who doesn't misunderstand us, he is like us. He is like a man like us, but he's God himself. This is like a dream come true. So I'm going to play you this song. Alan Dutch is the guy who wrote this, good friend of ours. And this, again, is from 40 years ago. And this is a song that he wrote and that the four of us sang. You'll pick out Dorothy's voice, you'll pick out my voice, but don't be distracted by that. Pick out the celebration of unexpected life from a God who cares about you and who has made the effort to come into your presence and to bring you life. Gosh, it's like I'm dreaming. Can you believe it? I'm dreaming. So here we are.
Sown such bitter tears, now harvest the joy. When the Lord brought the captive ones of Zion home, we were like those who dream, and our mouths were filled with laughter, and our tongues with joyful praise, and our mouths were filled with laughter. Restore us to grace as captives of your love. Restore us. Free as the captive ones of Zion remain. We'll be like those who dream, and our mouths will fill with laughter.
Father, as we come to the manger this year, I pray that you would give us that same enthusiasm that the angels had, that as they showered over the shepherds, great enthusiasm. After all that time, for all mankind, you've come. You've come. I feel like I'm dreaming. Can this be true? The God of the universe, my own Creator, has come to bring us to Himself. And Lord, it is true. You have done great things for us. And that means you've done incredibly great things for us. You paid the price for our own sins, for the separation we placed between us and you. You paid the price for the deeds that we have done that remove us from your love, move us away from the outcome of your love. But you never stop loving us. And as a result, your Son came that we might be brought to you. And so, after such a wait, after so long a time, at exactly the right time, you've come. And we're glad. And I feel like I'm dreaming. Lord Jesus, come again soon, we pray. Amen.